Good evening, everybody. Welcome, ladies. Good evening to everybody here who is watching tonight. Let me just introduce myself as we wait for people to populate in here. I'm Aliya Jasmine. I will be your host this evening. So I'm a television reporter and producer. I received my master's in environmental journalism from USC and recently co-founded the environmentally focused creative agency called Lily Media and Design Lab. Some of my most recent work includes covering California's wildfires and LA's endangered mountain lions for NBC News here in Los Angeles. And for those of you joining from Canada, you're probably most familiar with my work reporting from Canada's Great Bear Rainforest in partnership with the WWF Canada for MTV Canada and the Discovery Channel. I sit on the board of directors for Nature United, and I'm also a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. So I am honored to be joining you tonight from my home here in Santa Monica, California. Which I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge as Tongva and Chumash land. I'd also like to acknowledge that Canadian Geographic's offices are located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin peoples who have been guardians of and in relationship with those lands for thousands of years. And I'd also like to further acknowledge and recognize that the work of Canadian Geographic reaches across all of the distinct First Nations, Métis homelands, and Inuit Nunangat, and for that we are very grateful. So I'm delighted to facilitate our discussion with these three amazing women tonight. First, we're going to hear from Ingrid Waldron, Associate Professor in the Faculty of Health at Dalhousie University in Halifax, and the Executive Director of the Enrich Project, which is investigating the socioeconomic, political, and health effects of environmental racism in Mi'kmaq and African Nova Scotian communities. Then we're going to hear from Alexandra Morton, who has become somewhat of a hero of mine and has also been called the Jane Goodall of Canada because of her passionate 30-year fight to conserve British Columbia's wild salmon. She's a field biologist turned activist who has done groundbreaking research on the impact of ocean-based aquaculture. And finally, the ultimate boss lady, Megan Leslie, the president and CEO of World Wildlife Fund Canada. Prior to joining the WWF, Megan served as an MP representing Halifax for 2 terms. As a passionate environmentalist, she was proud to assume the role of environment critic for the official opposition. So the way tonight is going to roll out for all of you guys watching is that we'll first hear from each panelist about her work and experiences for about 5 minutes each. And then I'm going to ask everyone a few questions and they'll have about 2 minutes to answer, but also comment on each other's answers. After which I'll be happy to take questions from all of you, from our audience. So to everyone watching this from Canada and from around the world, please feel free to post any of your questions at any time that you're inspired by this conversation. And you can do that in the chat box or in the comment section at any point that you're tuning in tonight, and I'll refer back to them. So without further ado, Ingrid, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your work?
Sure. I was born in Montreal, Quebec, to Trinidadian parents. And I moved to Halifax in 2008 and started doing work on health, the structural determinants of health specifically, and environmental racism. So in general, my research interests include mental illness and help seeking in racialized communities. I'm currently doing a project on the impact of COVID-19 in vulnerable communities. I've looked at also intimate partner violence among elderly Black women, and mental illness experienced by Black women in Nova Scotia, as well as most recently the impact of climate change in the African Nova Scotian community in Nova Scotia. And of course, my biggest project is on environmental racism, the social, economic, and political and health effects of environmental racism. So I think I just want to focus a little bit on environmental racism and my environmental noxiousness, racial inequities, and community health project, which is the Enrich Project. That project I've been conducting over the last 9 years to address, as I said, the social, political, and health effects of environmental racism in both Mi'kmaq communities in Nova Scotia and African Nova Scotian communities. And I've designed the project to be collaborative and interdisciplinary and multi-sectoral, multi-partnered, but also multi-method and multimedia. So over the past several years, I've tried to raise awareness about the issue of environmental racism through public engagement events and workshops, just to get people thinking about some of the issues and just raise awareness, but maybe to incite action in some cases. Also doing some data collection, of course, writing journal articles and writing a book that was published in 2018 to continue to create awareness about the issues, but to get the stories out there of the communities that are most impacted. There is a map that was also developed for my project that actually shows the location of these communities near to toxic waste sites. What evolved out of the Enrich project, which has been extremely exciting for me, is an NGO that I co-founded in 2017 with a few environmental scientists called Rural Water Watch. And Rural Water Watch conducts water testing projects in rural marginalized communities in Nova Scotia. So we go into communities, we test their water, we go back to the community to do workshops and to explain the link between, for example, contaminated water and illness. So it's something that I'm really proud of because it's something that's immediate and tangible for communities. I'm also involved in a slightly new project on climate change. It's a topic I haven't really ventured into, but I wanted to look at how climate change is conceptualized by the Black community in Nova Scotia. So I'm working with Climate Action Services to hold workshops in Black communities in Nova Scotia to get a sense of the health effects of climate change and the social and economic impacts of climate change. So that project was actually completed a week ago, and there's a final report that will be shared to different organizations in Nova Scotia. And there's also the documentary film that's streaming on Netflix. I co-produced that with Elliot Page in 2019. And that's been very exciting. So it's been streaming on Netflix since March 29th of last year, and has been certainly a great awareness raising tool, certainly globally, which is really important to just give people a sense of what's happening in Canada and Nova Scotia, and get people on board in certain cases, incite them to action, which is what I like to do with my research. What's most important to me, however, is getting a bill passed, legislation approved on environmental racism. I worked on the first Nova Scotia environmental racism bill with Lenore Zan back in 2015. It was a provincial bill, but she came to me in February of 2020 and said that she wanted to turn it into a national bill to address environmental racism across Canada. So she did, and she introduced it in the House of Commons February 26th of last year, and she put it forward to second reading December 8th of last year. That was the first hour of the debate, and the second hour of the debate occurred on March 23rd. And surprisingly, the bill was approved at second reading. We've been trying to get this bill approved at second reading since 2015. So it's a small victory. The bill is not legislation, but it has an opportunity to be. So I'm really excited about that. I think all the things that I'm doing is important. It's a different approach to addressing environmental racism, but I do think we need legislation. And finally, last year, I co-founded a national anti-environmental racism coalition with Naolo Charles, who is based in Toronto. And the purpose of this coalition is to bring together organizations in the climate and environmental sector to work together to share resources, to share skills, expertise, with the end goal of addressing environmental racism, not simply in Nova Scotia, but across Canada. So we do our work through 6 working groups. And one of those working groups is the campaigns working group, and they were vital in terms of supporting Bill C-230, the environmental racism bill that I mentioned earlier. So that's a bit of a nutshell of what I've been doing through the Enrich project over the past 9 years. Thanks a lot.
That is incredibly fascinating. Thank you so much, Ingrid. And it's, I can't wait to hear more from you, because so many of the things you said just, spark so much interest. And I think when you hear about environmental racism, a lot of these big stories kind of come to mind, but what people forget with this intersectionality between social justice and the environment really is how normalized it can be for Black and Brown communities, even things as simple as tree canopy cover, right? And what neighborhoods have tree canopy cover and what neighborhoods don't, and what the implications of those are with asthma rates and everything else. So we'll get into a lot more with you later, but thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over now to Alexandra. The floor is yours. Alexandra, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your work?
Hi, thank you so much. That was amazing, Ingrid, really interesting to hear. So as a girl, I decided to spend my life studying communication in a large brain non-human animal. And so that basically left the choice between primates, elephants, or the large dolphins. And I picked the large dolphins, particularly the orca or killer whale. And I started this work in an oceanarium in Los Angeles. But after a few years of watching the whales give birth and then the babies starving to death because the mom just didn't know how to take care of them, I wanted to try to find the family that those whales were from in British Columbia, because every family of orca speaks a different dialect. And I was a young woman. I'd spent 4 years studying these sounds, and I thought that was a really long time. And so I went to take that knowledge with me. And it was surprisingly easy to find the A5 northern resident orca that the female Corky had been taken from. And they were in British Columbia on the Central Coast. And so I then spent a couple of years trying to find the perfect place to study them year round. I was modeling my life and research after Dr. Jane Goodall's, where you put yourself into the environment of the animal. And it's an observational study. You basically have to learn everything from how to live there to how to really see what is going on. And this place was called Echo Bay. I had a few fabulous years of research, and then the industrial salmon farming industry moved in, which I thought was a great idea at first. I thought it would bring more jobs, keep our little one-room school open. But very quickly, the impacts of this industry became apparent because they are feedlots, and so they amplify parasites, viruses, and bacteria. And nothing I could do could get the government to come and just move these things off of the major migration routes of the wild salmon. And so there I was, a person who'd gone to study language in a non-human, trying to figure out how to talk to humans and tell them that these farms need to be moved off the migration route of the wild salmon because the fish were dying, we were getting algae blooms, the whales were leaving. I feel like us biologists are a little bit like the fingertips of humanity trying to send a signal back to the brain. And so I use science. I've published in major fisheries journals. Then I used the court. I went to court 5 times against the industry and never lost, but nothing changed. Then I moved to protesting with large groups of people, and then activism, just standing on the farms with First Nations for 280 days during the winter. And that actually worked because the First Nation governments got involved. And as I got to know these governments better, I realized that the Indigenous governments had been formed at a time when if you lost the salmon, they would lose their communities. And so they're very different from the non-Indigenous governments. So at this point right now, I work very closely with the First Nations of this area, providing them information on the sea lice impacts. I track a couple of different viruses, now working on a bacteria as well. But we're very close, and the solution is just so amazing. So there are ways to farm salmon on land, which other companies are doing, and it can be done. But the most exciting thing is this science called genomic profiling, where you can just take the tiniest little clip from a fish without killing it, and you can read its immune system. And so if you do this as the fish is traveling along the coast, you can get the signals of how we're affecting them. Is the water too warm? Is there a virus? Is there a bacteria? And then we can go in and change our behavior. And the next year we can ask the fish, did we make it better for you? And they can tell us. And so this is where my work is going now. I don't do this science myself, but I have become a huge advocate of this science, because if we start listening to the animals around us and learn our role in these ecosystems, we can have things like wild salmon that feed the trees that make the oxygen we breathe. We can see these power cords of life, and we can learn how to fit in. So that's what I'm up to now.
I literally have chills, and I'm sure everyone watching does too. That was unbelievably fascinating. Thank you so much, Alexandra. And it's funny, there's so many things I thought about, and I'm sure we'll talk about more while you were speaking. But a couple of those things that you said, when you went up to British Columbia to look into the orcas and how they speak different dialects. I was lucky enough in one of the documentaries I did to be up there at a research lab and hear a few different orca families. And it really is, for anyone who hasn't heard this before, I go Google it, because it sounds like EDM soundtracks. Like they sound almost like David Guetta's like DJ. It's like that was a horrible example, but I find that it's completely fascinating, and it is really beautiful. So I love that you definitely were specific about that, because that's one of my most distinct memories of going up there. So we are going to turn the table a little bit further and give the floor to Megan. Megan, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and about your work?
Sure thing. And it's amazing. Alexandra and Ingrid and I work on completely different things, but there's a lot of themes to what we're talking about. So I wanted to share maybe the evolution of my career, and I'm going to go back to the beginning. I grew up in a hard rock mining town in Northern Ontario called Kirkland Lake. And this is Macassa Mine. It's a mining community. This is where my grandfather worked, my uncles worked. And in the 70s and 80s, the mines started to close. People started to move away. And my town was pretty desperate for jobs. So there were lots of proposals for economic development. And one of those proposals was to fill the empty mine shafts under our town with toxic waste. And my best friends in high school, Patty Mullins and Amy Morrison, we were 15 years old. We were not scientists or environmental analysts, but we knew that just didn't sound very good. So on the day of the town council decision, we got black Bristol board and fluorescent yellow paper. We cut out little words and we spelled out, no, we won't glow. And we staged a demonstration outside of town hall during that council meeting. And council actually rejected the proposal. Now, I do not think that Amy and Patty and I made the difference, but that moment had a profound impact on me because it was the first time I'd ever participated in decision-making about the future of my town. And I finally understood that I could be a part of the fabric of community making these kinds of decisions. And I knew at that moment what I wanted to do with my career. So you'll see a slide of me at school. I started in high school organizing an environmental club. I convinced my school to plant trees for Earth Day. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to work on the issue of justice. And for me, justice meant environmental justice, social justice, and economic justice. Now, I didn't have that language at the time in high school, but I had this feeling in me that that's what I needed to do. So I went off to university. Here's a shot of me with the infamous Amy and Patty. We were really into protests. We went to a lot of them. This is a tuition protest, I think. And then I went off to law school. And I didn't go to law school because I had this deep, abiding passion for the law. I don't. But I really wanted to learn how I could use the law as a tool for change. I worked on housing and welfare and human rights. And it was interesting because any victories that I was lucky to be a part of didn't come from those Hollywood movie scenes where you're like in the dimly lit library poring over cases, trying to find that smoking gun precedent from 19 Dickety-Doo. I mean, when I had victories working in poverty law, those victories came through organizing. They came through panel discussions, letter writing campaigns, public support campaigns, education workshops, protest, know your rights workshops. And I was really lucky to be a part of a number of important policy changes in Nova Scotia as a result. So in 2008, my local MP, who was Alexa McDonough, former leader of the NDP, she decided she wasn't going to run again. And I put my name forward as a candidate. I won, which is another story for another day. And I ended up serving as the MP for Halifax for 2 terms. Now, I didn't decide to run because I had a deep and abiding passion for federal politics. I don't. And I also didn't decide to run because I thought politics would bring me more power or that it would be more effective to work on the inside. When I've been doing organizing work, I fully understood that the power of community was really what could make things happen. But at the same time, I thought we need some good people in council, in our legislatures, in parliament, who have a different kind of power, the power to introduce policy or to vote on legislation or to move motions and shape public policy. And I did have a few wins when I was in parliament, but it had nothing to do with my power. It was because there was an entire community behind me pushing for some kind of change. Now, in 2015, I lost an election, I lost my seat, and I had to ask myself, what next? And I knew I still wanted to work on this issue of justice. So David Miller, who was the then CEO of WWF Canada, he called and offered me a job working on ocean conservation. And I wondered, was WWF somewhere where I could continue to work on the issue of justice? And for me, the answer was a resounding yes, because I realized that WWF knows that putting a fence around something and saying, you can't go there, that's not environmental protection, and that certainly isn't justice. Working with communities to ensure that there is enough fish for the whales and the seabirds, and also for Indigenous fishers, and also for non-Indigenous fishermen, and also enough fish for the economic independence of coastal communities, and enough fish to support healthy coastal ecosystems that leads to healthy oceans, that leads to a healthy planet. That's what justice is for me. So in 2015, I took the plunge and I said yes, and now I've never really looked back since. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Megan. And there, obviously, you talk so much about your passion and those activist pictures of you in high school. I just wish we were friends in high school. I feel like you're my people. But I want to talk to you and to everyone else on the panel about your passions. Before I do, I am just going to shout out a few people who are in our chat right now. We have Sherry, who says, worried about the policy-backed promotion of nuclear waste storage in Canada by our government. Andrew says, hi from Burlington. Sharon is watching from Devon, Alberta. We have Jeff from the GTA. Lots of hellos to all of you. SF Gold says, Alexandra Morton, a national treasure and a hero for those of us who love whales. So all Canadians excited about this panel, enjoying this conversation. So lots of discussion happening in those comments, and comments coming in questions. And for all of you who are watching, keep commenting, ask questions, specific or general, and we will get to them in just a second. But before we do get to all of the viewer questions, I have a few of my own. We heard Megan really talking about her passion, and I'm so curious to all of you, because obviously it's a common thread, the passion that all of you feel. Besides being passionate individuals, which you all obviously are, how does your passion drive you, and how do you think passion in particular has shaped your decisions? I'll start with Alexandra.
Well, I guess I could say it just has made me relentless, and it has caused me to give up what I really wanted to do, which wasn't to study sea lice or, talk to politicians or occupy a farm, but it just won't let me go. And I want to just say to everybody who feels like the mountain is too big to climb, just take one step and then another step and another step. It's the art of plodding, Plodding. You can cover a lot of ground if you do that. But yeah, the passion, it's an amazing fuel source, isn't it? It stays with you.
Ingrid, I see you nodding as well. How is passion what you do?
It's exactly the same. It drives me, allows me to be really persistent and consistent with a topic that I think is extremely challenging to address for a number of reasons. I think what most excites me about the project is the interdisciplinary nature of environmental racism. Through the project, I've come to recognize that people in different fields, students and professors and professionals in different fields all have a stake in this topic, whether it's lawyers or political scientists or sociologists or environmental scientists, have come to recognize how interdisciplinary this topic is. And because of that, I continue to learn from students and from professors. And the people that I meet from different sectors often take me on another path, something that I didn't think about, right? For example, Rural Water Watch, the NGO I mentioned, I was kind of ready to say to the environmental scientist, no, that's not my field. That's not what I do. I don't want to do this. But I decided to listen to him. Thank God I did, because I think it's one of the most important, tangible things that I'm doing in terms of giving something back to the community. So I think for me, what keeps me going is the fact that I decided long ago to keep myself open to people who want to meet with me in my office, regardless of how tiring it is. Because, yeah, I mean, I'm extremely busy, but I've continued to say yes. And when I say yes, I meet somebody with interesting ideas and they take me down another path. And I continue to be excited about the project because I'm meeting new people with new ideas and because I've committed to being open to that. But the challenges are real in addressing this particular issue. But if I feel like I'm trying to solve a puzzle in a way. And I think that's what drives me. I feel like there's some answer. There probably isn't any answer that there's no answer there necessarily, but I feel like there's something there that I need to solve. There's a piece of the puzzle that I'm missing in some way, and somehow I need to find it. And that's what keeps me going.
It's interesting because it's this thread of not only passion, but also curiosity, right? That seems to be driving driving all of you. Megan, what about you?
Oh, Ingrid put it just like hit the nail on the head with the puzzle of it. I truly don't think that elected officials have very much power. Even the prime minister, whoever he or she may be, can't just snap their fingers and make something happen. They need a constituency behind them. Now, unfortunately, for lots of us fighting the good fight, those constituencies are very powerful. They have lots of resources, constituencies like banks or oil and gas or the aquaculture industry or pulp and paper or pulp companies. They've got a lot of resources. It's harder for us. But to Alexandra's plotting, I love plotting, plotting. How, who doesn't love the underdog story? Let's figure out how we can do this. How do we use this piece of legislation or get this community group or get that media attention? That puzzling, that trying to figure out all the resources to make happen what is possible is really inspiring for me. And that's 100% where I get my passion. It has to be focusing on what's possible, because this is tough work, man. It's tough work at times.
Yeah. It's really interesting that how you say like legislation can't be the be all end all. And I find that really interesting, especially Ingrid, and I'm going to turn it over to you, but in the work that you do, historically speaking, when you look at the environmental justice movement, so much of the changes come from grassroots organization, but not enough has been done at the government level, right? So you have I wonder what your answer is to what Megan said in terms of legislation can't be everything, when obviously no matter how loud people are screaming on the ground level, you do need it to change at some point, or maybe you don't. I mean, what do you think about that idea?
There was a point where I thought it was all about legislation, probably 6 years ago. And that was my focus, getting Bill 111 passed. It was my obsession. And then over the years, I realized that as I've allowed the project to be multidisciplinary and intersectoral, that different people have come to me with different solutions, different types of solutions. One solution is testing people's water. That's immediate, right? And that's a different kind of solution, but it's ultimately the most important one because people are concerned about what's in their water. I still think, however, that legislation is important. I remember speaking to Lenore Zan about this at a meeting once, and I said, you keep reintroducing Bill 111. What's the point? It keeps getting shut down. So why do it? She said, well, Ingrid, if we don't have mass mobilization of communities, the bill will never pass. So you need to make sure that you get people on board. And that told me that, yes, it's about legislation, but it's also about the power of community members to mobilize around that bill. So for me now, I think it's everything. I think addressing this particular issue is about legislation. It's a piece of the puzzle, but I think ultimately it's community members that drive the bills that you put forward or the petitions that you sent out. So I agree with Megan. in the end, it's about the people who are impacted and the people who support them. And that's been really evident in the work that I've been doing.
Yeah, that's Ingrid's bill to a T. I mean, that's why you've had such incredible success. Like the way that you've been able to organize in community has been breathtaking.
Well, thanks. It's been tough. It's really been tough. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound like any of the work that any of you do is easy. That's for sure. On a consumer level, so much of the marketing for eco-friendly products is targeted at women. And so my question for this panel particularly is, why do you think that like saving the environment is considered women's work? I mean, why is all the marketing really targeted at us?
If I could just jump in, it's so interesting. So I just wrote a book, and that was the title I wanted, This Woman's Work, because, woman's work has been sort of, whatever. It's been considered something smaller down the line, but it's really the foundation of us. And we are the ones that create the home and stand ground in that home. And we also have endurance. The men are very spectacular. Like in my field, they go to Antarctica and they do, crazy, amazing things. And it's the women who stay there. And for example, when we did the occupation on the farms, the men couldn't take it for the most part, but the women were able to just hold that ground. And so I just think it's just the way we're made.
Yeah, that's interesting. What to the other ladies on the panel, what do you think? And particularly on a consumer level and in terms of marketing, I mean, what do you think about these eco-friendly products really being marketed to women?
Great question. I don't know that I've thought much about it. Ingrid, do you have any?
Maybe not specific to that, but just kind of building on what was already said is that I started to notice with the project that the people on the front lines of just environmental justice organizing were always women, Black women, Indigenous women. And I was curious as to why that was. And I was kind of wondering, what's the psychological toll of doing that work over and over again, and the disappointment that comes with it, because I'm seeing some of that disappointment, and I've only been doing this for 8 years. And I was a bit kind of like, where are the men? Like, where are they? And a Mi'kmaq woman said to me, Ingrid, this is not considered to be a burden to us. This is Mi'kmaq culture. This is Mi'kmaq tradition. We are responsible for protecting the land, and we are responsible for protecting the water. So this is our calling. We protect future generations. So this is our work. So perhaps in terms of when you talk about consumer products, I mean, it's targeted to women because we, as Alexandra said, we're keepers of the home, but we're also protectors of future generations. So it's become perhaps very gendered over the years. There's certain things that are just very gendered. It's feminized in many ways. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's feminized. And those products have been feminized in many ways because perhaps partly what I said earlier, that women are seen as keepers of the home, protectors of future generations, just protectors in a very different way than men are. So I think that plays into it partly.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I think that the term feminized is really interesting too. I read this study, and I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but I'm sure people watching know it. And if you know it, if you could just write it in the comment section, otherwise I will post a link later. But it's this really big study that was released a few years ago, and it was about toxic masculinity as it applies to the environmental world, environmental journalism, environmental sciences. And it was interesting, the things that they when they would show images, your instant reaction of what was masculine, what was feminine, right? Like just the bigger, more occupying, more hazardous to the environment thing were generally considered very manly. And then the more light or the least impact on the environment were considered more feminine. And the psychological aspect of that was, how do you market that towards men versus women in terms of color, in terms of material? And so I wonder if that has a play in this at all, and it worries me if it does, because it's more than just beyond the environmental realm, but just what it's doing to our conscious for both women and men in terms of the toxic masculine.
Yeah, and we're not going to save the world with environmentally friendly deodorant. I mean, it's got to be bigger than that, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Even if the color of the container is black, men will buy it. Yeah, exactly. All right. So there are obviously, there are some female environmental leaders who have become household names, like Jane Goodall, we mentioned earlier, Greta Thunberg, and you three are each leaders, especially in your respective fields. Can you name a woman who is not on this panel that you would consider a pioneer or a champion in environmental leadership circles, and what it is that they are doing to make waves? And if you see me looking down on my phone, it's because I am probably going to be trying to follow them on Instagram as we talk about them. So let's start with you, Megan.
I wish you had given us a heads up on these questions. They're like real think on your feet questions. You know what? I'm going to name somebody who I work with, who's a colleague at another organization, and that's Justina Ray at the Wildlife Conservation Society. And I'm naming her precisely because of what Alexandra was just talking about with plotting. This is a woman who has worked on many things, including caribou, and who just has done the work and keeps doing the work. She's a scientist, she's credible, and one of our environmental unsung heroes.
Amazing.
I'm going to select some individuals from Nova Scotia. I'm a bit biased, but the individuals that I've been working with, I have been amazed by. Doreen Bernard and the other grassroots grandmothers that were featured in the film have done amazing work, persistent and consistent. Louise DeLeo of South Shelburne, also featured in the film. What she's been able to accomplish since 2015, when I first met her, closing the landfill that had been open since 1943. She got that closed in 2016, and then some. Amazing. Vanessa Gray in Amjinwang First Nation, Chemical Valley, Sarnia, Ontario, in her 20s, and has done some really amazing, and like a true blue activist, has done some really amazing things and is really committed. And there are many others, but for me, it's the women that I've met and who have spoken at talks that I've been involved in, and events that I've organized. I've seen what they've done on the front lines, and I think we've got some amazing women right here in Canada who are grassroots organizers. So I would like to give it to them.
Well, two people. I do have to go back to Jane Goodall. She's wonderful, and she's very proper in the way she presents herself. But I heard her at election recently, a lecture, and she goes in her very sweet English voice. For any of you climate deniers out there in the audience, you can just leave now. This was fabulous because it was feminine, but it really drew the line. But I also have to give kudos to Elizabeth May. I don't know, that woman, she just keeps going. She gets elected. She's on top of so much. She's protesting, getting arrested. Really, it's just, people call me the ever ready bunny, but I don't know really where her energy comes from. And I worry often about her that, that she, because she puts so much out there, but she is a hero in this country.
Those were great answers. And I have like 1,000 more questions that I cannot wait to ask you. And I hope that I can jump in here, but I'm going to give everybody else a chance right now to ask as well. So let's head over to Don Randall says, yes, Elizabeth May. Sherry says, my question is, what type of novel ecosystems do we need to have access to whenever the ecological losses have occurred? And how do species turn out to adapt to this idea of cohabitation? Does anyone have an answer for that one?
Can you repeat it? What?
Yeah. I'll repeat it. Sherry says, I don't know who it's directed to, so anyone can jump in here and answer this one. My question is, what type of novel ecosystems do we need to have access to whenever the ecological losses have occurred?
The moon. That's a novel ecosystem we probably need access to. That's a very interesting question, because I don't know that there are any novel ecosystems on Earth. We've kind of covered the planet with ourselves.
There are some places that are called climate refuges. So we know that ecosystems are changing because of climate change. And we've been able to figure out, well, where are places on the planet that will be maybe less impacted or the last to be impacted. And we can kind of think of them as refuges, especially for wildlife. So those refuges exist in different places on the planet. I'm very hopeful that we don't get to that point.
Yeah.
But when we're thinking about protected areas, for example, it's important to think about, well, where are those refuges, and should we be protecting those areas for whatever comes in the future? One place on the planet would be Tuvalutuk, formerly known, or you might know it as the last ice area. So up in the Arctic, and in a warming climate on a warming planet, it will be the last area of continuous ice coverage. And this area is now protected as a marine protected area, and it's really important for ice-dependent species. So it's forward thinking, or trying to climate proof as much as we can. So thinking about those refuges as opportunities for protection and stewardship as well.
You think also, and I'm not sure if this relates to the question, and I might be far off here, so I pose it as a question as well, but the idea of reintroducing native species to an environment that is going through ecological loss, that the famous video of the wolves in Yellowstone or whatever, but those kind of ideas of when you are seeing like biodiversity lost in an ecosystem, to maybe find natural solutions for that ecosystem, that would be a way forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why, in terms of restoring the wild salmon, it's not hatcheries. We don't need to manipulate them. We need to strategically get out of the way. Basically, we need to see where the power lines are. We need to understand how things are connected and what is causing this ecosystem that is keeping us alive to work. And so, I try to talk sometimes in terms of like your car's engine. You wouldn't want to, put sand in the gears and all of this. No, you want to just figure out how it works and keep it running. And I think the natural solutions are really the only solutions, because they've been hammered out over the millennia. Yeah,
and also, making these ideas simpler for a mainstream audience, right? Like, I see that obviously in a lot of the work that I do. I'm sure, Megan, you do as well. But the idea, there's so much incredible information that I feel like lives in these scientific circles that are often, there's a gap when it comes to, obviously, every American can tell you every name of every Kardashian sister, but has trouble telling you what a greenhouse gas is, right? Like, there's this huge communication gap that exists. And it's interesting because, in your work, especially, with the salmon, I think, me personally, I had such an incredible experience with that when I went down to do my first documentary in the Great Rainforest. And I had no idea how big of a part the salmon plays. We went down there to really talk about the spirit bear, right? Like, it gets the most attention up there. And once we were up there to see, I was there for a salmon run. I was very lucky. It was one of the most incredible things I ever saw. It was a long time ago when the salmon runs were still very populated and incredible, and you'd see them jumping out of the water. And but one of the most incredible things for me was just seeing like all these dead salmon everywhere. And at first it seems like very morbid, and then you realize how incredible it is for the whole ecosystem if you look closely. And for those of you watching, you may already know this or you may not, but it was one of the most incredible things for me to witness. And jump in here at any time, Alexandra, because I'm on your territory. But when you see this one salmon that had all of its, had its brain eaten out by the wolves, and then had its stomach eaten out by the bears, and then it's being picked out by the bald eagles, and then all of a sudden, like, the carcass has just gone into the ground and then helps make these huge trees that then help us breathe. And it's this entire ecosystem, and without the salmon, that all breaks apart. But when you think of the Great Bear Rainforest, you don't necessarily think right away like, oh, it's the fish that is the main thing here, right?
Yeah, I feel like I'm teaching people the birds and the bees. This is all connected. Some people are like, oh, I don't eat salmon, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm like, do you breathe? Because when it blows southeast in the city of Vancouver, you are breathing fresh air made by trees fed by salmon. So yeah, I think everybody here realizes it's the storytelling is the way to communicate with people.
But not just for the general public as well. Oh, sorry, Ingrid, go ahead. Oh, it wasn't you. It was Aliya. Sorry. Not just for the general public. I mean, I think about the Species at Risk Act. So we have species that are at risk of what? Of extinction. And we need to take action to prevent that from happening here in Canada. And what happens is there's a species, and then we have an action plan, and we say, these are the things that will bring that species back. And then here's another species, and these are the things that will bring that one back. And we have these plans for each species that, if you add them up, are practically impossible to do, will cost, I'm going to, be silly, $1 bajillion trillion. And it's just, you can't do it. Well, what if we looked at all of this differently? Something we're working on in the St. John watershed is something called priority threat management. So what are the threats that we need to tackle that impact multiple species? Because back to the original point, this is an ecosystem. So maybe we can actually get this done, save more species, protect or safeguard more species, and bring back their populations if we treat the whole ecosystem and not just have these like random siloed attack plans for different species. And this is smart people, and this is our government sort of forgetting to look at the big picture, forgetting what that story is of the eagle and the salmon and the bear and the trees. So it's public education, but you'd be surprised how those of us working in this world also forget that story.
That's great. That's a great note, actually. I think that is something that we forget. We get so far into it and in the silo, and that is really, it's a really interesting point, actually. We have another question here from Aaron, and it's, how can the average, I like this question, how can the average Canadian make a difference in the work that you do? So people who are watching this, who want to help in the work that each of you are doing, how can the average Canadian help you?
Well, in my project, I mean, I think there are many ways. I think, are there communities near to you, in your neighborhood, in your backyard, that are experiencing forms of environmental injustice? Get to know them, develop authentic and organic relationships with them, learn about the issues, be present, show up, attend events. People will start to get to know you because they see your face all the time. That's kind of the way that I did it, because I was new to Nova Scotia. And then everybody's on Facebook. The communities that I work with, they have Facebook pages, and sometimes there's a call to action, and they post that on Facebook. So if you want to kind of start getting into immediate action, activism, advocacy, get onto the pages of the communities that are on the front lines. It's another way actually to enter the communities and to get to know people. So I would say, learn about the issues, support the communities, but I think also, most importantly, sometimes when you are, you want to support communities, there's this, because you're so passionate, there's this tendency to kind of take over and impose yourself on people. And it's not because you're a bad person. It's because you're so passionate about the environment and you want to support. But I think it's always important to remember that you should let the communities lead, and that you should be in the driver's seat. It's like a bit of a dance, right? Somebody has to lead, and the other person needs to make sure that they know when to step back a bit. So many people are, they're very enthusiastic about these issues, but remember that communities are experts in their own lives. Sometimes what they don't have is the resources, right? So they need supporters, because the supporters may have connections and networks and, financial resources, all types of resources. So just remember that you're there and that you can provide support, but listen to what they're saying and make sure that they're always in the driver's seat as you're trying to build those relationships. But for me, it's finding out what's going on in your area, in your community, who's on the front lines, how do you get to know them, show up, be there, get on the Facebook page, know exactly what's happening at any moment, see whether or not there are places where you can help them. If there's a call out for tools, because they're building something in their community, or they want you to sign a petition, or there's a fundraiser, or those are really immediate things that you can do, and it helps you to build relationships.
Yeah, sometimes it's your job to bring the coffee.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's your job to drive people to the meeting.
that's
You
right.
know, Ingrid, everything you said, yes, those Facebook groups are gold. Sometimes organizations have email lists. Get on them. You know, so you can hit delete. So you got too many emails, hit delete. But you're going to open a few of them and you're going to realize, oh my gosh, there's this great thing that I can attend, or there's a great thing I can do, or a great thing I can give money to. Like, just getting connected in that way, you'll be wanted. You know, your efforts will be wanted, and they'll be myriad.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to help on the salmon issue, we are at a critical moment right now because the Minister of Fisheries has actually made an extraordinary decision to not renew the licenses on 19 salmon farms that are in the narrowest part of the migration of 1/3 of all of British Columbia's salmon. So if you just want to write to Minister Bernadette Jordan and say, thank you for this, because this is not, she didn't form a committee. She didn't ask for an investigation. She did something that is going to provide these little fish relief this spring. So I have a Facebook page, and I'm going to be out counting sea lice on these little fish, which I don't expect there to be any. They should be beautiful this year. And so that people know that this action has actually helped this wild salmon run. And the other thing you can do is just tell your restaurant, please don't buy farm salmon till it's raised in a tank. So those are two, really important things. But also what Ingrid said, show up. Oh my gosh. If somebody is going to go to the trouble to put on some kind of an event where you are trying to show government that there's a lot of people involved, because government does that. They're like a weather vane, they need to know, do they have people behind them? Is this what the people want? Show up. And if you can't be there, buy somebody else a bus ticket, or give some funding. It really, really makes a difference for everybody to get involved in issues like that.
Thank you so much, ladies. And, I'll just echo something that Ingrid said that I feel like, I'll say it again. It's so important not to go into a community and tell them what they need, but to ask them how you can help them. And I think that is a really important takeaway. All right, another question here is, what can we do to act on environmental policy that affects Canadian companies creating risk of ecocide abroad? For example, a particular Canadian oil and gas exploring Kavango Basin in Namibia. That kind of went over my head a little bit, but I think what the question here is, what can we do to act on environmental policy that affects what Canadian companies are going out and could be hurting the rest of the world? What can we do, I think, is what they're asking.
Yeah, like Canadian mining companies. I would definitely find the people the activists who are involved with that, and you might have to just stand in front of their office for a month. It might take something like that, but this is so important because these companies that are based in one country and then do their business in another country, they're not, this is not working, particularly companies based on share price. And so I really do think we need to stand up against this. Because that's what's going on with the salmon farming industry. These companies all have their head offices in Norway, which is a fabulous country with a lot of conscience, but it's not being applied to the coast of British Columbia. So you have to make these companies famous for what they are doing, and just stand in the way of it.
We have a question here that's specifically for you, Alexandra. It is inland fish farming better than coastal farming? Why or why not?
Yes. So if you put your salmon in a tank, you're protecting the ecosystem from it, but you need to go one step farther, and they need to source the food from, say, insects and find another protein, because the problem with farming salmon is you got to go fishing first. So really what is better is to farm a fish that eats vegetable matter. And so if aquaculture might be a really great idea, but you're going to have to start with growing the algae and then farm a fish that is eating that algae and just create your own ecosystem. But the short answer to your question is yes, it is better if it is on land. because the state of wild salmon in British Columbia is really in the balance right now. Every single wild salmon counts.
And Alexandra, that's always right. Like closed containment, on land fishing, aquaculture, always better.
Well, so I'm not really an expert on all the species, but yeah, they're feedlots, and feedlots have to be closed. We learned that with avian bird flu and, all the cow diseases. Yeah.
I mean, it's intuitive.
Yeah. Thanks.
This is a question from Sophia for everyone on the panel. Sophia asks, Sophia's question just moved. Sophia asks, what advice do you have for a young environmental science female student who is starting to find her passion?
Well, I'm going to just jump in here right now.
Don't say go become a doctor. Don't say that.
No, I was going to say you have to learn how to communicate, because that's going to be the most important thing. The short video, I have learned to make short videos, which I'm like the last person you would think would do that. But you need to learn to communicate. And you also need to put a really high priority on caring for yourself. Because I see these spectacular young activists who think they can just go hard and fast, and then they burn out. But power to you, and contact me on Facebook if you want more advice, because we really need more of you.
I would also say that there's different ways into the environmental field, not just environmental science or the focus on pollutants, because I've seen that with my project, that you can get into the environment field through sociology. Those are environmental sociologists. That's more of what I do. If you have a concern about colonialism and capitalism and you want to conceptualize this issue around racism and issues like that, that's one way to do it. There's, you can get into it through health. You can get into it through planning, through geography. So I don't know if she's in environmental science in the discipline as yet, but recognize that there are so many different disciplines through which you can address environmental issues, and not just the traditional environmental science discipline. I just find it's really exciting, the different ways in. So I would kind of encourage her to explore that before she settles on any one aspect of environmental science.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you even see like so many people in the last few generations of high school graduates were really interested in tech, right? Obviously with Silicon Valley blowing up, and now you're seeing so much of that interest in clean tech. And these kids who went on to college and really got into tech and are now going, okay, how do I use these skills to address the climate crisis? So that's a really good point.
I'd love to add one thing. In the course of my career, I've had the honor of meeting a lot of scientists, and some of them are afraid to take their science and turn it into an opinion about what needs to change in the world. And I've explored this with them, and it comes back to, I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to get this language wrong, but science, nothing's proven right. It's just a theory until it's proven wrong. And no, you're being a chicken. If you have learned the science and you know what is right and what is wrong, you have got to do advocacy. You have a responsibility to do advocacy.
Yes.
So if you are worried or scared, I'm going to tell you there are amazing scientists on science Twitter. Find one or two of them, and you will all of a sudden find this entire community of scientists who are brave and opinionated and who are fighting for what's right. And then, so you'll have that community, you'll get to know them as real people as well, because they are real people. And then I would say, and don't forget the community groups, don't forget the NGOs, don't forget, folks like me who are looking for those scientists to help advance the work that we're doing, because your work is incredibly powerful. And I do think you have an obligation to take that knowledge and give back a bit with it.
Fantastic point. Yeah,
absolutely. And for anyone watching this who is a scientist, doesn't know how to tell those stories, contact me. I just started an environmental creative media agency just for that, to help bridge that gap, that communication gap between scientists and the environmental world and mainstream media. And I mean that
wow.
anything. And I'm happy to help with those messages as well, because I think it is really important everybody is able to speak as eloquently as the women here on this panel did today. Thank you guys so much. We have to wrap up here, but there's one question that keeps popping up over and over and over again. So I'm just going to ask it as our last question. It's for Alexandra. Should we or should we not be eating wild Pacific salmon?
Yes, eat wild salmon from Alaska. It's well-managed fishery, and you're feeding an industry that is protecting the fish.
There you go. All the people who asked that question, you now have your answer. Ladies, thank you so much for being with us this evening, for giving us your time as we sign up for the night. I also wanted to remind our audience that Canadian Geographic's publisher, the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, of which I am a fellow, is a nonprofit organization, and donations are greatly appreciated to help the society put on programming like this. So please consider that as a way of helping as well. Thank you so much, Ingrid, Alexandra, and Megan, for joining us tonight. I know your schedules are so busy. Your wisdom was unbelievably appreciated by myself, and as well, you can see how much your insights were appreciated by all the people in this comment section and who are watching. So we look forward to watching your work in the years to come. I can't wait to watch that documentary. And good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you so much.